Raina Telgemeier. I can't even imagine where we would be without Raina. I can't fathom what the landscape of graphic novels for young readers would be like if Smile hadn't been published 10 years ago. So please enjoy my conversation with Raina Telgemeier.
Origin Stories with JJK.
Jarrett J. Krasowski.
Jarrett Krasowski. It's a graphic memoir.
Hey, kiddo.
Tonight's guest.
Raina Telgemeier. I'm Raina Telgemeier.
Welcome to the debut episode of Origin Stories. I'm here today with one of my oldest pals in all of children's comics, Raina Telgemeier. Hello, Raina.
Hey, Jarrett. How's it going?
It's going well. So we do share this story often, but for historical context, for the viewers and the readers out there, we should tell them just how we met.
Back in the MySpace days, I got a message from this dude who was like, "Hey, I'm an illustrator. You are also an illustrator, and I like your work. Let's be friends."
It was like 2003 or so.
I think it was 2006. So
2006? Was it that late?
I think so, because my first Babysitter's Club book had just been published.
Oh, no. We were friends before then. We were
Really?
friends. Yes, because I remember, because David Levithan and I met in 2003. And I remember, a year later or so, we were talking and we'd become friends, and he's like, "Oh, we're creating this whole new comics line at Scholastic, and we're going to adapt the Babysitter's Club books to be graphic novels." And we hired this person named Raina Telgemeier, and I said, "We're MySpace friends," because I remember my book Annie. I guess the marker for me was my book Annie Was Warned was published, and I think you bought it at your local bookshop in Brooklyn or New York.
To buy a copy of that book, months or something before you messaged me.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and and then we met for reals at the Massachusetts Library Conference. I don't remember what year that was, but your daughter had just been born. So
she was born in the very end of 2008. So I bet when we met in real life, it was probably the spring of 2009. Yeah, because the first Lunch Lady book was coming out, and I remember we were sitting at tables next to each other, and just hoping the librarians would stop and talk to us. And most of them didn't. I mean, some did. But I also remember specifically you had a portfolio of original art from your Babysitter's Club's books.
Yes.
And I remember we were like, those are only like $20 a piece. I should buy one. I was like, I don't have $20. So let's pretend like we didn't know each other from MySpace. We didn't have emo music as you clicked onto our pages. Do you remember what songs you would have? Because also for historical reference, MySpace was a social media page in which you expressed yourself by placing a song when people clicked on your page.
I never had a song on my MySpace page.
You never did that?
What was
okay.
Yours?
I was probably Postal Service. Anything by the Postal Service. So let's pretend I've never read any of your graphic memoir. We haven't known each other since the early mid 2000s. I want to know, how did Raina Telgemeier come to be? When you were a kid, what were some of the things that excited you? Like, what was your house like?
Nothing in my house excited me. It was a kind of small apartment that I lived in with 5 other people. I have 2 siblings younger than me, my mom, my dad, and then my grandmother moved in with us for a little while. So it was like kind of a tight space, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. And my little way of escaping and fighting space for myself was that I had a drawing desk and I loved to draw. So I made comics starting around age 9 after discovering, Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts and everything else in the newspaper. And so my little world existed on the page. And that has never changed since those early days.
I think that, young readers today don't fully understand or appreciate the fact that when we were kids, like the only way we got cartoons was to wait for Saturday morning. And cartoons were on for just a couple of hours. And they weren't graphic novels being written and illustrated and published for us. So what were some of your early influences?
Well, I mentioned the newspaper strips that I read. So every year a collection was published of these various comic strips. And so by the time I started reading comics, I think there was like one trade of Calvin and Hobbes at that point. And my dad blew my mind by taking me to the bookstore and being like, you know, that comic strip you like, Raina, there's a book. And I was like, what? There's a book? So I could bring that home and like read it over and over again. You could read it every day. You could enjoy it as it unfolded in serial. And then you could go back and read the whole thing in like one afternoon. So, yeah, it was sort of like experiencing it in two different ways, in two different time frames. And then as the years went by, I just became a collector of those books. And I was collecting not just the Calvin and Hobbes trades, but the Far Side collections, the For Better or For Worse collections. I really loved Luann by Greg Evans, which is kind of like a teenage romance soap opera. I loved Dennis the Menace, which was single panel, but felt like, you know, there was a whole world in that one image every day. What else? I loved Foxtrot. Even though Foxtrot wasn't published in my newspaper, I still knew about it. So I did have to wait until the end of the year to read all of the Foxtrot strips from the previous year. But yeah, so those were my comics. I really fell in love. And then this is where it gets weird, is that my dad saw that I was a lover of comics, and he decided to introduce me to something that was on his pile next to his bed, which was a graphic novel called Barefoot Gen. And that was by an artist named Keiji Nakazawa, who had lived through the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And it was his sort of fictionalized memoir of that experience. And
so your dad gives you this really intense graphic novel when you're a kid. And I heard something about you read this book while you were at camp or something?
Family camp. So we were, you know, during like quiet time every day, I'd go and read a little bit of Barefoot Gen, and then I'd read some more. And then when I finished the book, I melted down. I was so upset. And I think the reason I was so upset was because up to that point, comics were funny and they were like an escape and kind of a joy. And then this was a comic that presented a historical event that was also just brutal and heart-wrenching. And the book ended on a cliffhanger. It ended with several of the main characters' family members dying in the atomic bomb. And I couldn't handle it. And so my parents had to like soothe me and be like, yes, it's a true story, honey. But, you know, the artist survived so that he could tell this tale. And it's really important that kids like you could read this so many years later. So it's like I filed that away in my head for later. Like, okay, the most visceral response to a piece of art I have ever experienced was from a comic book. And so anytime from then on that somebody would say something like, oh, comic books are dumb, or they're just for kids, or, you know, that's throwaway entertainment, I've always been the kid that was like, just you wait, here's a book for you to read so that you will understand that that's not true. And so I became like little pacifist Raina when I was 10.
So like you, I was a kid who would also go right to the comics page in the newspaper, and I would go to Calvin and Hobbes and Snoopy. And I also really loved For Better or For Worse. It was a comic strip that was a real slice of life of this family, and the characters aged in real time.
Yeah.
And in fact, the son, the big brother, was just a year older than we were growing up.
Yep.
And you know, hearing you talk about those comic strips, hearing about your father giving you this book, Barefoot Gen, I really sense that those two pieces came together to create the Raina Telgemeier we all know.
It really did. Yeah. But I was a tween when this happened. So I still needed to spend some time developing my art style and my voice as a writer. And I think I equally drew from the books of Anne M. Martin and Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, who were also doing realistic fiction about contemporary girls, you know, and I got to read their stories. And so when I wrote in my diary after school and I described my day and I talked about my friends, I was writing in that same voice of, you know, this is what I look like. This is what I'm feeling right now. This is why me and my friend like got into a fight today, or this is how we made up. This is why my sister is really driving me crazy. And so it was just natural for me to continue writing and then drawing comics with that same point of view, that same perspective. And absolutely, I mean, for better or for worse, I still think of it as like one of my foundational experiences, just discovering that. And not just like, oh, you can make comics like this, but also, oh, it's okay for me to be a person, because you just described how Michael Patterson was about the same age as you and I both are. And then his younger sister, Elizabeth, was about the same age as my sister. And I credit Lynn Johnston for the fact that she wrote these children's points of view from her own childhood. And she remembered so many things about just, feeling self-conscious and about misbehaving sometimes and feeling guilty about it, but then having to like lie in order to save face because you're so embarrassed to tell your mom that you did something dumb. And just she would get like a whole week's worth of material out of something as simple as Michael has a pimple and he, doesn't just want to cover it up with like a little bit of zit cream. He's like, I don't want to go to school. And then he has to come up with an excuse for why he doesn't go to school. And it's like you can take any moment in your life and any feeling and you can sort of start to walk down that path of what if. And so for me, writing comics has always been just like that. Like, well, how did I feel about something? What are my memories? What are the ridiculous things that did happen? What could have happened? But again, like I didn't know any of this when I was younger. I just knew what I liked to read, and it all just kind of got stored into this file for later.
When I was in art college, one of the best pieces of advice I received was from a teacher named Orrin Sherman, and he taught us to never follow trends. Whatever's popular now isn't going to be popular by the time you get out there. And so, if you're thinking vampires are all the rage right now, and you're going out there to say, well, now I need to work on a vampire stories, by the time you make it, that trend will have come and gone. So when you were graduating college, I mean, I'm sure you weren't thinking like, I'm going to write and illustrate graphic memoir stories about my own life as a tween, and then have that be one of the most popular segments of the publishing industry. I mean, that wasn't going through your mind, I'm sure, at the time.
Yeah, those were just the thoughts that were running through my head at the time. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about art school. So I went to School of Visual Arts in New York City, and I chose that school because they had a cartooning program. However, when I went for my entrance interview, the chair of both the illustration and cartooning departments sat down with me, and I showed him my portfolio, which had a lot of comics in it. And I said, which one should I do? Which one should I choose as my major? And he was an old school illustration guy. And he was like, definitely illustration. I guess because he didn't see any superheroes in my portfolio, he just thought, well, your style and your voice and your sensibilities are a little bit closer to what the trends are for, children's picture books and for editorial illustration. And he didn't see what I was trying to show him, which was that I was making personal memoir short story comics, and I had been for a few years. And he just went, illustration. And I was like, I trust you wholeheartedly, random dude. And so I became an illustration major.
Yeah, which
his advice
still benefits you for what you
absolutely
do. Sure.
I mean, yeah. I have a great solid foundation in painting and drawing, which I might not have gotten otherwise. But while I was there, I was like, let me just take all the cartooning classes that I can. And actually, I wonder if I had been a cartooning major and those had been like my primary assignments, if I would have been less excited about them. But because they were electives, I was like saving it for last. And I was like, oh, this is the project that I'm excited to work on instead of that dumb, illustration thing that I'm supposed to do. But I graduated sort of with a foot in two worlds. And as soon as I was done with school, the only thing I did was make comics. I think I've been paid for illustration work like maybe 5 times since graduating in 2002. So I've made most of my career as a cartoonist. And so I started publishing mini comics while I was there, while I was at SVA. And they were 4 classes. We were doing short story comics as assignments. And then we were supposed to, at the end of the semester, like combine them into a little anthology. And so I just started printing and making and giving out and selling my comics, and I started taking them to the small press comic conventions that were all over the country. There was Alternative Press Expo in San Francisco. There was Small Press Expo in New York. There was the MoCA Arts Fest SPX Small Press Expo. That's in Bethesda, Maryland. MoCA was in New York City. And yeah, there were just tons of opportunities at that time for self-publishers to enter that world, but none of the book publishers had started paying attention yet.
No, they wanted nothing to do with that at the time. And I'm hearing you tell the story, and I'm thinking like somewhere out there are people who have handmade Raina Telgemeier zines somewhere in their comics collection.
You probably stapled them yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
every single one handmade.
And you were just doing what you love to do.
Yeah, and I was telling stories from a contemporary perspective, so a lot of them were about friends and just little experiences that I had, but I also drew short stories about my childhood, and those seemed to be the ones that resonated with people the most. And so when I'd table at a show and I'd have like 5 or 6 minis on the table, people would pick up my work and they'd see my illustration style, which looks a lot like, cartoons, comic strips. So they'd look at it and they'd go, "Oh, this is cute. Would this be appropriate for my kid to read?" And I'd be like, "Well, in issue 4, there's a thing about a party I went to, and you might not want to show them that one, but everything else is pretty kid friendly." And then over time, I just started kind of gearing my stories towards that question. And eventually I was kind of able to say, yeah, everything's good for kids. And at the time, there just weren't that many other indie cartoonists that were doing kid-friendly work. So we all kind of found each other. It was like those became our crew. And I think that's kind of where I met you too, was when you were interested in making kid-friendly comics. But this was like 2004, 2005, and the one that ended up breaking the mold was Baby Mouse. By Matt and Jenny Holm. It was like Random House took a chance on that graphic novel series. Kids started to read it. And it's really because of Baby Mouse that Scholastic was able to take a chance on the graphics imprint, and why, they were able to offer me a contract to adapt the Babysitter's Club into graphic novels, because Baby Mouse let.
And if I remember correctly, the Babysitter's Club was initially published in black and white, right?
Yeah.
And they weren't even sure if people would be buying graphic novels for their kids, and since the production cost is so high to go full color, a lot of those early books were going just in black and white, like Babysitter's Club, or in limited color.
But right, because Baby Mouse was welcomed into those libraries by librarians and educators, then they wanted more.
First Babysitter's Club book was 2006, and you made a few of those. Smile was published in 2010. And how did that come to be?
Smile grew up in tandem with those books because I started drawing it for the web. So I was just posting like 1 page of Smile every week and tossing it up online, and didn't have a big readership, and didn't even know myself like where it was going or what was going to happen with it. And it was also just, line art, black and white comics. And I intentionally drew the pages really small so that they would fit on my scanner no problem. And so I could just kind of dash them off once a week. And it was interesting because I thought people were going to just read a story about my teeth, but they got really interested in the story of like my family and the relationships that I had when I was 12, and the middle school dynamics that really became part of Smile's legacy, I guess, like the, the personal stuff and the stuff that I really gravitated towards when I was reading comics, that interplay and those feelings. And so I realized like your story doesn't have to have an amazing premise. It doesn't have to be about a really high concept. And, that didn't jive with publishing, because at the time what was popular was Twilight and all of the vampires stuff. And it was like Buffy was popular. And so everybody wanted genre. And when I wasn't doing genre, I got a lot of pushback from it. And people saying like, we don't think memoir is going to sell. And we don't think that realistic fiction has much of a place in comics. But I mean, it's amazing how, looking back on it, it seems like nearsight or farsight. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Short-sighted.
Short-sighted. Thank you.
Short-sighted.
Like there's
and
a
that
thing with
goes
glasses and I can't remember what it is.
but that goes to what that teacher said to me at art school, which was, don't go chasing trends, right? So if you were
Right.
if you were going to be like, I'm going to be now Marina Telgemeier the vampire cartoonist, we never would have gotten the Raina Telgemeier that's you, right? And
Right.
you're talking about and so I should ask you, so did those zines make a way for you getting hired for the Babysitters Club?
Yes, directly. In fact, and it was a project my last year that I was at SVA. I wrote a short story about the experience of reading Barefoot Gen when I was a kid. 3 pages long. It's kind of in and out. Like, I liked comics, and then I read this book, and this book ruined my life. But actually, I think it made my life better. And here's a little story about that. And so my teacher loved it. I got an A. I printed it in, one of my mini comics. And then it was republished in an anthology. And then that anthology got into the hands of Jana Morishima, who was one of the founding editors at Scholastic Graphics. And she wrote me an email afterwards and said, I read this little story of yours in this book, and I loved it. And we'd love for you to come in and talk about children's graphic novels with us. We're just starting a line here. And in the beginning, they wanted me to pitch like an extended version of that story. They wanted me to introspect and, dig into a foundational experience in my life. And I was still pretty young at the time. I feel like I was just getting my feet wet. I had been, I didn't even know how to tell a story that was longer than 8 pages at that point. I had not done it. Yeah. So in the conversation that we had, they were like, okay, well, what did you read when you were a kid? And I told them that I had loved the Babysitters Club. And because it's their property,
like, here we go.
They put two and together. I mean, even Sailor's eyes lit up during that conversation, and he was like, okay, what if you, with your cute, like, kid-friendly comics here and the Babysitters Club? Yeah, okay. So they signed me up for 2 books, and that turned into 4 books. And those books were published at the tail end of the aughts. And I mean, they came out and they did okay. As you mentioned, they were in black and white because we didn't really know what the market looked like at that point. Yeah. And I had never even put color in comics before. I was a newspaper strips girl. So I just, everything was black and white to me. And manga. So,
Or copy machines.
And I'm not really a colorist. And the reason that I don't like working in color is because ink dries really fast. And watercolor dries really slow. So it's like, I can make comics faster if I just keep them black and white. And they're, like you said, they're easier to print. And so sometimes it's just the tools that you have in front of you and what they can do that end up informing what your art style is. And I mean, had I grown up in a house with all of the tech that we have now, if I had Clip Studio Paint and if I had a Cintiq and if I had a Wacom, like that might have made a difference. But we are who we are because of where we're from and what we did. And I have no shame. So when kids are like, oh, do I need a special tool? Do I need to like get a program in order to make comics? I'm like, what are you comfortable with? Do you like working with a pencil? Do you like working with a Sharpie? Do you like, drawing in your breath on the car window with your finger? Like that can be comics. You can make comics any way you can. I'm going to write that down. I hadn't thought of that example before, but that's
a good example. That's a good example. That is a really good
You've
example.
got a car with windows, and so those can be your panels.
Yes, exactly. There's no rush to try to get published. That'll come in time. You could make copies and share it with friends locally, or you could snap pictures and you could email it with friends to share around. But, you just have to be really patient. And, and when you're living it, you don't know how all these influences are going to affect you and change you and send you in certain directions. And then we also don't know what books are going to come out and what things are going to be successful or not. Because of the success of Smile and like this graphic memoir, this whole thing, which was what no one would have thought on paper, and publishers would not have thought that would have been successful then, but also, ignored a huge swatch of readers who just didn't want superheroes, who didn't want intense stories, who wanted very sort of kid-friendly slice of life stories told in the graphic novel format, which we weren't ubiquitous. It wasn't around much. And then that made way for El Defo, and then Roller Girl. I was able to do Hey Kiddo because Scholastic had success with Smile, and so you have a graphic novel that's not a memoir that I thought maybe we could read from a little bit. Would you be cool with that?
I would be cool with that.
Graphic Novels Readers Theatre.
And so it went.
Thank you, Percy.
Clap, 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 clap.
The next candidate for the role of Bailey Johnson will be Rodney Colossi.
Sure you don't want to audition, Jesse?
I'm sure. All this auditioning stuff is just too much for me. I don't like being judged.
That she wouldn't say such a secret of kiss.
I mean, to stack myself up against all these guys?
I think you stack up just fine.
Next up is West Redding. West,
Ready?
you may begin.
How then could a maiden so fair be ashamed of a man like me? Wow, he's really good.
He's perfect. Oh man, don't tell my brother I said that, okay?
Smack.
But seriously, I'd hate to be the casting director for this thing.
Yeah.
Anybody else here to audition? Anyone?
Now's your chance, Jesse. Come on, do it.
No, I can't.
Why not?
Why don't you audition?
Fine, I will.
Wait, what? Callie?
Yep. Springtime in the South is like a song in my heart. The heat makes it beat, but the music is.
Thank you, Callie. That will be quite enough.
Bow. Now you see why I stay backstage?
Yeah, I guess we can't all be good at everything.
Nope.
Callie, that was awesome. I think we should take you for bubble tea to celebrate your star turn.
Oh, knock it off.
Bubble tea does sound good.
Yeah, so this would so be us in high school. Like it is backstage.
High school, middle school. Yeah, it was.
So much for hanging out and
You're
being part of that.
welcome.
I hope to see you in person soon. In the meantime, thank you, Raina, for all of your work. And we can't wait to get more on the shelves. And we all have to be patient because these graphic novels take a long time to make.
In the meantime, let's get MySpace resurrected, and then we'll all go there and hang out, and it'll feel just like we were hanging out in 2004.
That's perfect.
Okay,
Awesome, Raina.
right on. I'll see you there.